Fortuna. Forged in the fire of Melanthios' uprising, the Temple of the Triarchy is the dominant public faith of the Empire in Noria. While the temple worships all Numen as emanations of the same divine, they consider three among them the purest. These are Dios the Ever-Hospitable, his wife Kibera, the Blood-Giver, and their firstborn son Ereter the Storm Avenger. From Phineas the Younger's Creeds of the Known World, Book 2, Chapters 3-4. The morning had begun for Fortuna with stretches. As they waited, Fortuna did them again. They were harder with armor on, whatever little Fortuna still bore since Lucian had finished hearing petitioners for the day. Fortuna would rather have done it unclothed, even if that meant doing it alone. First they began with the arms. Always the arms. Fortuna felt the muscles tense beneath leather, their second skin. Then beneath that, a quivering. The wind whistled softly against the gorge's walls as they stretched, accompanying the faint rustle of olive branches overhead. In winter they would bear fruit, but that seemed as distant as the sooty clouds and a dying gold sun to the west. Gold as what? Fortuna challenged. Iroh's promise had been gold, but gold was soft, and so was he. Fortuna's world was one of steel, where gold had little place apart from being held. As Fortuna watched, the olive trees and their own outlines mingled, casting a strange shadow on the rock face in front of them. The ground beneath was real enough, though. The sparse bits of soil lining the outcrop halfway down Cassius Gorge was coarse, hard, and stung Fortuna's palms when they pushed against it. Last time they had come here with a blanket, that same one held far, then close, then far again. But that was long ago. Even this late into the day, the haunted ruins at the gorge's bottom were still visible. Once Fortuna had longed to go down there, to touch their toppled arches and cracked walls. But that longing had long since faded. "You're late," Fortuna scolded as they heard a familiar set of footsteps coming down the hidden stair cut into the cliff face. "And yet you still came." Iroh approached softly. "Not only that, you waited." Fortuna snorted. He had taken time to change, trading his riding cloak and scarf for a loose, sleeved tunic of black satin clasped with amber beads. His dark hair had been combed straight, his parchment-smooth hands rubbed clean, but none of that hid the creases on his once smooth cheeks. He's thinner than he was, Fortuna realized. His eyes, though, they had changed the most. A shade darker than Lucian's onyx-flecked ones, there was a depth not before seen in them, a bitter discontent that seemed only darker in the shade. The years had clearly not been kind to him. To Fortuna, though, they scarcely could have been kinder. They had hardened their palms, sharpened their nose, and bestowed brawn where it was previously lacking. Armored in confidence and steel, Fortuna was a far cry from the angry, bitter youth of 6 and 10 which Iroh had left 5 years prior. "What of it?" Fortuna snapped. "You were late. Did you think you'd just fly down here like one of your raptors?" "A raptor only flies to one place." Iroh smiled, and for a moment the last years melted off him. "But each place it flies from has a number, each number 2 command words, one to recall and one to record its next echo. Such is the logic of tending just one raptor, discounting all it takes to rear them." Fortuna sighed. "I asked why you're late, and you respond with talk of glorified vultures." "Not so." Iroh stood next to the rock where Fortuna sat. For a moment they were silent, until Fortuna relented and Iroh took his place next to them. "I merely meant to show," he continued, "how there is logic in all things. Besides, without such vultures, our empire would surely fall apart." Iroh glanced towards Fortuna, and for a moment something glinted in his dark eyes, only to then pass like a morning chill. "But tell me," his tone shifted, "what has changed since I've left?" What hasn't changed? Fortuna thought. Nothing much. Their voice softened as the seed of something took shape. "It's been as one might expect. While you've been away, I've sharpened recruits into soldiers, run down bandits, and advised your brother on matters of state. Today was no different. Farmers, tanners, ironworkers, masons. The faces change, but the tale stays the same. The common folk, squeezed by their neighbors, seek us, their betters, for justice. And you give it? Iroh's words were more challenge than question. We do, Fortuna insisted, but many don't. Most don't. Why would they, when justice to them means keeping hold of their bribes and stolen harvests? My great-grandsire, Leonidas Whisker, was a hired blade. I can only practice justice alongside your brother because Leonidas did the squeezing for me. We try our best, yes, but what good can a petty lord and his legate do when they're simply being lords and legates crushes those without lands or titles? The best they can do, I suppose, Iroh mused. In that way you and Rook are well alike in trying to aid their lord. Fortuna scoffed, and the Rooks are themselves beholden to their own god in addition to their lord, much less the people they ought to serve. They looked left and found Iroh snickering. What? I'm just glad to see you're the same as 5 years ago, maybe even more so. For the first time, Fortuna was at a loss for words. Far below, the gorgeous shadows had begun flooding upwards. You really think so? They finally said. In some ways, Iroh admitted. And you and more, Fortuna replied. What did you think of the lavender farmer? Iroh paused. Which one? He asked slowly. Either, Fortuna insisted with a smile. Just tell me what you thought of it. Iroh briefly glanced over his shoulder as if hearing someone coming down the cliff face after him. Nothing of that sort had ever happened prior, not in the 10 years since Iroh had first shown Fortuna this place. Without lavender's smoke, Iroh began, Arcania hunters could not gather the silk with which we weave our finest garments. Isn't it odd, then, that, despite a lifetime of harvesting such a valuable crop, that old man was nevertheless dressed in rags? Odd? Fortuna exclaimed. Odd? It's a travesty! What if it were grain? Grain is cheap, Iroh replied. Says the Rook. The last vestiges of daylight began passing overhead, and the shadows were now upon them. When Iroh didn't respond, Fortuna knew. You didn't do it, did you? They finally said. Did what? Complete your initiation. The words came out faster than Fortuna could feel them. You're not a true Rook. Why? Iroh touched a hand to the necklace hanging beneath his tunic, gazed fixed on the far cliff's sunlit edge. No, not yet. But if the morning winds carry me south tomorrow or the next, I will be. 40 days they gave me, 40 days of riding, and today's the 20th. You won't, though. They nearly had him. I've learned much, I admit. Iroh's gaze remained fixed on the cliff, and the Rooks hold the Emperor's respect. It's a worthy life. But something stops you, Fortuna finished. Iroh looked down for a moment until his gaze met theirs. Fortuna, he asked, in the past 5 years, has this place gone unvisited? The words washed over Fortuna. Was this truly Iroh's illusion, that he could win by saying eloquently what speaking bluntly would not? Was that why he had lured them down here? Fortuna shook their head. You never change, Iroh. Really? The trepidation was gone from his voice. Of course! Fortuna slammed a fist against the stone. You! It's always been about you. What you want. What you see. How you want things to be instead of what they are. You asked what's changed? If this place had been far from my mind, everything's changed. I know it has, Iroh snapped. 5 years prior we were betrothed, children to third-rate lords beholden to the lady of a god's-forsaken clan, even if that same lady has since gained the name Empress. But today my father is Tygon Otho's left arm, the commander of his cavalry, and... Fortuna saw the hesitation in his eyes, heard it on his lips. But in Fair Calais you could have the world, Fortuna wondered. But here... But I... They would be what? Fortuna realized. In the past they knew, but they had seemingly put aside those dreams of changing the world. And for what? To be Lucian's legate? Did I ever notice, Fortuna questioned, when I'd lost sight of what truly mattered? And yet, beneath all that, there was the other matter. What's stopping you? Fortuna asked knowingly. Iroh looked away, his eyes glinting in the dying light. You know. Which? Fortuna's words cut as iron. He didn't need to say it, though. The thing loomed large enough in both of their minds. Shield sons they had once been called, Benai and Amber teens and other men, though Detian had been the name for centuries. By ancient custom, if lacking a son, a family's daughter could live as a man, so that when they married, the child would inherit the ancestors of two fathers. Some even took a man's name. There had been Detian heroes, Detian saints, even a Detian emperor. The practice was rare, though, seen by many as unseemly. Half a millennium of the temple stigmatization had done its work, and Fortuna had had no surviving brothers. Is that all you came to say? Fortuna could barely hide their disappointment. No! Fortuna's shout rang off the canyon walls. You don't get it, do you, Iroh? You came back all this way, only half ready to throw away the past 5 years, and even then you can't say it. On your way back up here, did you ever consider what I'd want, how I'd feel, how I'd wish for things to be? Fortuna sniffed back tears, the sound of rising winds distant. Iroh, did you really come back here expecting everything to be as it was? Look at you. You long, you yearn, and yet you can't get yourself off the ground. My Iroh. The next moment they were embracing, and for a moment the past 5 years were forgotten. Just as soon as it began, Fortuna pulled away, and again the gulf of time stretched between them. You never said, Iroh whispered, whether this place went unvisited. Fortuna shook their head. Later. But Iroh, are you going to? I don't know, he replied. Would you? Fortuna shook their head. My place is here, in Erdonia, doing the best I can. I wouldn't. Fortuna looked up to find something had caught Iroh's eye. What is it? Fortuna followed their gaze to the bridge far above. Riders, 2 of them. Iroh rose to his feet, followed shortly by Fortuna. Far above, a windstorm was brewing. Even from down there, Fortuna could see their cloaks billowing in the oncoming gale. One rode a horse pale as milk, the other dark as midnight. You recognize them? Fortuna asked. Only the wind, Iroh replied. One I hope Lucian has prepared for.